Chapter 2. An Unusual Prince. It took 5 days for Philip and Joanna to reach the outskirts of Artwine's main city. King Hubert's flags waved at them from atop the towers, shooing Philip away. He hadn't spoken to Joanna any more about what happened with the thieves, but she had talked about it non-stop. She had spent the whole journey describing what she had seen and how it was definitely, no question, could only be magic, and Philip had spent the whole journey finding it harder and harder to rebuff her. She wanted to get to the bottom of it, but Philip wanted nothing more than to prove her wrong. Sure, the grass and branches behaving like that was odd, but it had been windy. They had been distracted and worried. It was simply a trick of their panicked minds. Philip was certain that their trip to visit his father would confirm that magic wasn't involved. King Hubert hailed from the school of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. He had hired trainers and knights to surprise Philip with attacks and challenges as he was growing up. And each time he had watched from the sidelines like it was some great show. A knight always had to be prepared, he said time and time again. And then, usually, some new little test, like stopping a flung spear or picking out the non-poisoned tart from a tray, would begin. What's more likely anyway? Philip leaned down from his seat atop Samson and whispered to him. Magic suddenly appearing out of nowhere, or one of the hits I took rattling me so good I mistook normal winds and vines for mystical ones. Samson snorted. The cursor had been with Philip longer than anyone save his father, and had spent years dragging Philip to safety when he was a page. What Samson deemed safe was mostly his stall or the kitchens, but Philip had a mind. 5 years after Maleficent's first and only escape from the Forbidden Mountain and Princess Aurora's going into hiding, King Hubert and Stefan had decided that marrying Philip to the cursed princess wasn't enough. He was to be her protector once the curse was avoided, charging with keeping Maleficent from assassinating Princess Aurora, and Philip's dreams of gallantry and heroism had been trampled by an endless parade of surprise tests and tournaments. Philip would never be in charge of his own life. You'll talk to Samson about what's bothering you, but not me, Joanna said, nudging her horse, Taliesin, up alongside him. Shall I find a stranger for you to discuss it with as well? They were a few minutes from the gates of the city, and the road around them was mostly empty. She nodded to a group of 3 merchants far down the road behind them. Perhaps one of them will do. You're painfully stubborn, he mumbled. As much as he loved her, Philip knew Joanna wouldn't understand. She knew what she wanted to do with her life and was already practically living it. She spoke of being a knight, the same way most people talked about the loves of their lives. She was even writing whatever it was in her book. She'd been working on the same piece for months. Philip hated how terribly envious he was of her certainty. Samson doesn't have any wild ideas about what happened, Philip said. Listen, it's much more likely my father concocted some plan to lure me home, and the thieves were a part of it. Joanna frowned and rose up in her seat to better see the city walls ahead of them. They were near enough to the city now that the shadows of the short towers crept over them, and Philip shivered in the shade. He had hoped not to return here until after he was ensnared by his wedding and Princess Aurora's curse. I know what you're not saying, Joanna said, finally. It's Maleficent. You're worried the magic might be connected to her. But what if there's a wizard out there who could help? Someone to defeat her once and for all. Philip bristled at the mention of Maleficent. It always came back to her. If they wanted to help, they'd come forward themselves, he said. The only good thing that he had come from the curse was that it had used up so much of her power that she was trapped yet again in her mountain hideout. She hadn't left the ruins there since. Fine. Consider this, then. What if you're magical? Said Joanna. If you're to be Princess Aurora's savior from a powerful magical being, you'll need magic. Maybe it's a belated gift from the fairies. What? Philip couldn't hold back his laugh. Fairies didn't have belated gifts. They picked their favorite baby and showered them with things like beauty and song. They didn't give errant princes the ability to hit thieves with wind. Don't take this the wrong way, but that's the most fantastical, unlikely thing you have ever said. And you once called me honorable. People don't just develop magic, and fairies definitely don't go about gifting it randomly. A part of Philip, the little boy who had wandered into King Stephan's castle, a child with the world at his feet, and left with only one path he would be forced to undertake, would have leapt at magic as an explanation. There were so many great wizard kings in his father's old stories. Magic would have been another way to prove himself to the world and leave his mark on it, so that some of the future stories passed down would be of him. But this Philip, older and wise enough, knew that none of it mattered. Princess Aurora would return from wherever the fairies were hiding her. Maleficent's curse would most likely be avoided entirely through that deception, and Philip would be forced to stay by her side in the time that followed to keep her safe from Maleficent's eyrie and her plans being foiled. Her true love would never even need to make an appearance, and Philip's marriage to her would ensure he was always near to keep her safe. Finally, Kings Hubert and Stephan would be family, and they would be working together to crush Maleficent just like in the old days. They were sure she would focus all her attention on killing the princess instead of trying to conquer the kingdoms like she had last time. Well, that's just rude to both of us, Joanna drawled, but he could see she was hurt. She urged Taliesin forward and cantered toward the city gates ahead of Philip. You're not the least bit intrigued by the idea of having magic? I loathe everything, Joanna, said Philip, and his frown wasn't entirely put on. Joanna refused to see the worst in anything, even him. She didn't deserve his eyrie. When have you known anything to intrigue me? When you told me about that dream girl of yours. It was the most wistful I'd ever seen you, she said, grinning at him over her shoulder. And there it was, Philip's secret, a girl who haunted his dreams. I shouldn't have told you, he whispered to Samson, ignoring the odd looks from people leaving the city. Even hearing her mention the dreams made his heart race and his blood rush to his ears. In his ears. They were more like nightmares, honestly. I would give anything for one good night of dreamless, silent sleep. For as long as Philip could remember, he had dreamt the same dream nearly every night. He was in an ancient wood from which he could never escape, and all he could hear was the daily goings-on of a girl behind a thick thorn wall. He never saw her, could never respond to her, and could never hear anything that might have helped him identify her. He was simply stuck listening to her. It was like overhearing a group of players performing on the other side of a thick, dusty curtain. Her voice carried the most, but it was still muffled and distant. Rarely he could make out who she was talking to. Usually her aunts or the animals they raised, and often he heard the mysterious girl singing to herself as she went about her day. In all the years he had been unwillingly eavesdropping on her, he had heard nothing that hinted at why he dreamed of her. He had once considered that the dreams were magic, but his life was already tied to someone else. He didn't want to investigate and uncover that he was intricately linked not only to Princess Aurora in the waking life, but to another stranger in his dreams. It was easier to think of the dreams as nothing more than flukes. Philip braced himself as they passed through the gates and slowed to a halt. I think it would be best if I spoke with my father alone. Restock and prepare for us to leave again once I'm done. He dismounted and handed the horse's reins to Joanna. She moved to talk, and Philip shook his head. He couldn't admit she was right, that she was one of two people who knew him so well it scared him. So he instead said, I have 21 days until Princess Aurora's birthday, and the sham that will be our marriage. I want to spend them away from here, even if we're only camping down the road. Of course, she said, and led Samson away. This way, your high horseness. Philip sighed, slouched his shoulders, and glared up at the looming castle that was his home. It was rather like his father, an intimidating sprawl of stone that had once weathered by the world for years and never once fallen. No siege had ever broken through its stone walls, and no king who sat on its throne had ever surrendered. The great gate separating the main part of the castle from the city was easy enough to pass through undetected, with everyone focusing on work instead of on the faces of those slipping past them. Philip joined a group of workers returning to the castle to prepare for his father's imminent departure. Philip knew his father would be riding ahead to Altor and arriving early to spend time with his best friend before the wedding. No doubt they would be discussing all their plans for Maleficent's inevitable return. A knight always has to be prepared, muttered Philip, stopping outside of his father's study, where the king always was this time of day. To fight, to outwit, to sacrifice, and to marry girls they had never met. Philip shoved open the doors. The study was small and mostly for show, the hunting trophies on the wall revealing his father's true favorite place to be. A great bear was rearing behind the large wooden desk, laden with letters and ledgers and half-drunk cups. King Hubert of Artwine was clad in hunting clothes, rifling through papers and muttering to himself. He hadn't even heard the doors open. Now, the blueprints. Yes, good. Philip cleared his throat. Philip, my boy! His father smiled, eyes gringling, and swept around the desk to him. There you are! King Hubert folded him into a rib-crushing hug. Here I am, Philip muffled into his father's shoulder. You know, in my day, knights answered to their lord. And his father, said his father, pulling away and wagging his finger before Philip's face, told them where they were going and didn't vanish for weeks on end. It wasn't even a mean statement, but it made Philip wince. Each story of knights of old, each hope foisted upon Philip, and each time his father had complete and utter confidence that he would succeed at protecting Princess Aurora from Maleficent, they ripped out the part of Philip's heart that still thought he could be the hero. Each compliment only made him think of the selfishness he knew lived in him. How could he be the good Prince Philip when none of his choices felt good enough? Well, I guess I'm not like the knights of your day. Philip slowly walked around his father's study and let his fingers skim the familiar objects. Speaking of, though, Joanna and I had an encounter with some thieves. A trio robbed the inn we were staying at, but they didn't seem interested in the money. Oh, the sort who sees the fight as the spoils, King Hubert shadowboxed to his chair. Give them the old 1-2, did you? Show them what happens to those who cast aside justice? Joanna showed them mostly, said Philip, dropping into one of the chairs before his father's desk. He propped his feet up on the corner. His father punched his boots lightly and collapsed into his own chair with a huff. Course she did. Always liked her. Anyway, I wanted to know if you had heard any reports of things happening about a 5 days ride northwest of here, asked Philip, or if you had perhaps planned another one of your tests for me. Can't say I have, said his father, an eye twitching toward his desk. He had already lost interest. Hard to plan things when I don't know where you are. So the king most certainly hadn't been behind the oddness of the thieves' attack. If he had, he would have wanted to know everything and go over each of Philip's mistakes. He also seemed unaware of any potential magic. Just a normal fight in a stronger-than-normal storm. Philip dropped his gaze to his hands. I figured I could be as unhelpful and self-deprecating on the road as I could be here. And on the road, you don't have to deal with me. I'm in no position to deal with you since I'm handling wedding preparations, said King Hubert, all traces of cheer gone from his voice. Well, Philip let his feet fall to the floor with a crack and rose. That's my cue to leave. Fun chat. I'll see you at the party. Now hold on, King Hubert huffed, beard bristling like an angry cat's back. I've been lenient, lad. I've been patient. I've ignored your shrugging off important assignments and not stepping up to the lead when presented with the chance. But you're a step away from crossing the line. My guard and I are leaving tomorrow, and Stefan is meeting us halfway. You're coming with me, and you're getting ready for this wedding. We have to be prepared. Prepared? Philip laughed and stepped back from the desk. It's a wedding. What could there possibly be to prepare for? Shouldn't we be more worried about Maleficent? Stefan and I have got plans for Maleficent. Nothing for you to worry about. King Hubert huffed and smacked his chest, the desk rattling as he stomped a foot. What plans have you and King Stefan made? Philip asked and crossed his arms. You never mentioned anything to me. Couldn't have, could I? Asked his father. You're off doing who knows what and avoiding your duties. No use telling you now, anyway. We've got it well in hand. It took armies to confine Maleficent to the Forbidden Mountain. Can you at least tell me if you still intend for me to single-handedly protect the princess from her? Philip asked. King Hubert leaned over his desk and wagged a finger at Philip. It likely won't come to that. You're the last line of defense. We can get some more training in on the road. But believe me, Stefan and I have everything under control. Oh, well, so long as I'm the last line of defense, that's fine, said Philip, a pit forming in his stomach. I don't want anyone to depend on me. You only feel that way because you say nonsense like that. His father made an annoyed sound in the back of his throat and sipped from one of the half-empty cups on the desk. You're lucky. No wars to speak of. No great battles. Oh, they'll temper you, make you a true knight and king. But they ruin too much. Wouldn't wish them on anyone. Philip gritted his teeth and ground out. Any plans you can tell me about? Leah has most of the wedding details worked out, said his father, falling back in his chair. He tapped his chin with a finger. She's particular, you know. Didn't want to set the wedding so soon with Aurora having been gone for so long. But I talked her into seeing reason eventually. She wants to talk to you about Aurora, though, before the wedding. Philip had always liked Queen Leah, which only made this worse. Queen Leah was being reasonable, said Philip. Aurora and I have never spoken, and according to Maleficent's curse, she has some true love out there. This again? His father rolled his eyes. You'll get to know her. Your mother and I hardly knew each other when we married, and I would have moved the moon for her, rest her soul. Philip had no memories of his mother. She died of fever shortly after he was born. However, he had heard story after story about his parents' initially contentious arrangement. Neither of them had been thrilled about being married, something Philip thought should have made his father more empathetic about his situation. But then she had unseated him during a jousting tournament and crushed one of his knights in hand-to-hand. His father had been too impressed to be angry about marrying her after that, their arranged marriage quickly becoming a love match, so the story went. Philip liked to imagine she was swinging a ghostly punch at everyone intent on making him Princess Aurora's guardian. You're entering into a contract, and that's better than any love. It's binding, said his father. Romantic. Philip took a small step toward the door, but something stopped him. Despite his father's assurances that he hadn't orchestrated the strange fight, Philip was still troubled by the oddness of the grass and branches moving to strangle Sire. Could it be possible that there was magic loose his father didn't know about? Have you heard from the fairies at all? Philip asked, trying to sound casual. What about that wizard who used to visit? Blue Barnham or something? Those fairies know better than to contact anyone. We can't risk Aurora's location being uncovered, his father snorted. And magic is all well and good. Gifts must be appreciated after all. But Barney hasn't set foot here in years, and good riddance. There's nothing an old-fashioned fight can't take care of. So Philip returned home for nothing but scorn. He had to get out of there. Well, I'll be leaving now, he said. I will meet you on the day of the wedding. Philip had run away enough to know the best moment to slip out. His father was far too dignified to chase after him, or demand he be dragged back to the castle. Nonsense! This is your life we're talking about, lad. You're coming with me. You're right. It is my life. Philip opened the door so that anyone nearby would be able to hear them. I'm not absconding. I'm not abdicating. His father flinched at the word. I will be at Princess Aurora's birthday, said Philip loudly. However, I am still a knight of this realm, and as such, I must make sure the thieves I ran into are not a part of something larger. Lying was so easy after a lifetime of playing the part of the agreeable prince. Now see here, his father cleared his throat and dropped his voice. You are forming an alliance against the greatest evil humanity has ever seen. I know, Philip swallowed. I'll be traveling with Joanna. She's earned her knighthood, by the way. His father stared at him, one eye narrowed and mouth twisted into a scowl. He watched a servant walk past the open door. She'll earn it once she delivers you to Altor 21 days from now, King Hubert said, voice even and reasonable. You can flee to every corner of this kingdom and pretend you're some nobody with no responsibilities, but you are and will always be Prince Philip. Philip did the only other thing he knew how to do. He ran away.